Hey, welcome back to Edgar Cayce Narratives. If you've been here before, you already know this channel isn't just about what people achieve. It's about the patterns that quietly shape how far they let themselves go. And today, we're looking at something that can be easy to miss, because from the outside, it often looks like progress, effort, and even discipline. This is about the people who get close to success. Really close. Close enough to feel it becoming real. And then something shifts. They slow down, they hesitate, or they step back entirely, even when nothing is actually stopping them. It doesn't look like failure, and it doesn't feel like giving up. But the result is always the same. They don't cross the line. And the most confusing part is, they often don't see it clearly while it's happening. They just feel that something about moving forward suddenly doesn't sit right anymore. There is a moment that feels very clear when you are inside it, and it usually comes after a long period of effort, when things finally start to move in your direction. You've done the work, you've stayed consistent, and now something real is forming. Not just an idea anymore, but an actual opportunity that can change your position, your income, or how people see you. It might be a promotion that you've been working toward for years, or a project that is finally getting attention, or even a decision point where you know that if you move forward, things will not stay the same. At first, everything feels aligned, because this is what you wanted, and you can see the path clearly. People around you might even start to recognize it before you fully accept it yourself. They might say things like, "This is your moment," or "You're ready for this." And logically, nothing about the situation feels out of place. You have the skills, you understand what needs to be done, and there are no obvious barriers in front of you. But then something small begins to shift, and it doesn't come as a clear thought. It comes as a feeling that is hard to explain. It might show up as hesitation, or a quiet sense of pressure that wasn't there before, or even a sudden urge to slow things down just a little. You tell yourself you just need more time, or that you want to make sure everything is perfect before moving forward. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. So instead of stepping into the opportunity directly, you start adjusting your pace, you delay a decision, you revisit details that were already settled, or you begin to question things that didn't feel uncertain before. None of these actions look like avoidance when you're doing them. They look like preparation, like responsibility, like being careful. But if you step back and look at it from the outside, something doesn't fully match, because the closer you get to the moment where success becomes real, the more your movement slows down. Sometimes it goes even further than that, because instead of just delaying, you might start creating small reasons to step away entirely. You might turn down the opportunity, or you might shift your focus to something less demanding, something that feels safer and easier to manage. And when you explain it, it still sounds logical. You might say the timing isn't right, or that you want something different, or that you're not completely sure this is what you want anymore. But if you look closely, the pattern is not random, because this doesn't just happen once. It happens right at the point where things are about to change in a meaningful way, where success is no longer a distant idea, but something immediate that requires you to step into a new level of responsibility, visibility, or expectation. And in that exact moment, instead of moving forward, something inside you pulls back just enough to keep things where they are. From the outside, it can look like you simply changed your mind, or that you weren't fully committed. But from the inside, it feels different. It feels like you were ready. And then suddenly, without a clear reason, you weren't anymore. And that shift, that quiet step back right before crossing the line, is where this pattern begins to show itself. At first, it's easy to explain it as a one-time decision, because everyone has moments where they hesitate or change direction, and not every opportunity is the right one. You can tell yourself that the timing was off or that something didn't feel right. And that explanation is enough to move on without thinking too much about it. But the pattern doesn't stay isolated, because over time, a similar situation appears again. And once again, you move forward, get close, and then something shifts at the same point. It starts to follow a quiet cycle that is hard to notice while you're inside it, because each step looks reasonable on its own. You make progress, you build momentum, and you reach a stage where success becomes visible and possible. Then hesitation appears, not as a clear stop, but as a slowing down, a pause, or a need to reconsider. After that, the retreat happens, sometimes small, sometimes complete, but always enough to prevent you from crossing into the next level. This cycle doesn't stay in one area of life. It begins to show up in different places, and that's when it becomes harder to ignore. In your career, you might take on projects, prove your ability, and position yourself for advancement. But when the opportunity becomes real, you hold back or step aside. In relationships, you might get close to something stable and meaningful, something that could grow into commitment, and then you create distance or lose clarity about what you want. In personal goals, you might invest time and energy into building something for yourself, a skill, a business, or a new direction. But right before it starts to work, your focus shifts or your motivation drops without a clear reason. What makes this pattern difficult to recognize is that it doesn't feel like avoidance while it's happening, because each time the situation looks different on the surface. The job is different, the relationship is different, the goal is different, so it's easy to treat each moment as unrelated. But underneath those differences, the structure is the same. Progress leads to possibility, possibility leads to pressure, and pressure leads to withdrawal. Over time, this creates a quiet sense of confusion, because from the outside, your life shows movement, effort, and even capability, but the results don't fully match that effort. You're not someone who doesn't try, and you're not someone who lacks ability, but there is a gap between how far you go and how far you could go. And that gap always appears at the same point, right before things become real. You might even start to notice it yourself, but not in a clear way. More like a feeling that something is repeating without fully understanding what it is. You look back at past situations and see similar endings, moments where you were close to something that mattered, and for some reason, you didn't step into it. At first, it might feel like coincidence, but the more you look, the harder it is to ignore that the same pattern is playing out again and again. And what makes it even more subtle is that this pattern doesn't create obvious failure. It creates almost success. You're not far from where you want to be, you're near it, close enough to see it clearly, but not fully inside it. That means there is no clear point where everything breaks down. There is only a repeated moment where you stop just short. Because of that, it becomes easy to live with this pattern for a long time without naming it. Because nothing looks completely wrong, but something never fully completes. And as this continues, the question slowly becomes harder to avoid, because if the situations keep changing, but the ending stays the same, then the cause is probably not outside of you. It's something that moves with you into every new opportunity. At some point, the pattern stops feeling like coincidence and starts to feel personal, because you can no longer explain it only through timing or external factors. You begin to notice that the hesitation shows up at the same stage every time, right when things are about to move forward in a real way. And that creates a kind of internal pressure that is hard to ignore. It's not just about what is happening outside anymore. It's about the question forming inside. Why does something I clearly wanted start to feel uncomfortable the moment it becomes possible? This is where the contradiction becomes clear. Because on one side, You have a part of you that has invested time, energy, and effort into reaching this point, and that part still wants the outcome. You worked for it, you planned for it, and you can see the benefits of stepping forward, whether it's growth, stability, recognition, or a sense of progress. But at the same time, another part of you begins to pull in the opposite direction, not with a strong refusal, but with a quiet resistance that slows everything down. That resistance doesn't always come as a clear thought. It often shows up as a feeling that something is off, even when nothing is actually wrong. You might feel tension in your body, or a sudden drop in clarity, or a sense that moving forward requires more than you expected, even if the situation hasn't changed. And because that feeling doesn't come with a clear explanation, your mind starts trying to make sense of it by creating reasons that sound logical on the surface. You might tell yourself that you're not fully ready yet, even though you were ready just days before, or that you need more time to prepare, even though the opportunity itself hasn't changed. You might start focusing on small risks that didn't seem important before, or imagining outcomes that make the situation feel heavier than it actually is. None of these thoughts feel irrational when you're having them. They feel like caution, like responsibility, like being thoughtful about your next step. But underneath those explanations, something doesn't fully align, because the intensity of your hesitation doesn't match the reality of the situation. The opportunity is still the same. Your ability hasn't disappeared, and nothing has suddenly become impossible. But your internal response has shifted in a way that is hard to justify. And that creates a deeper kind of discomfort, because now you're not just dealing with the decision itself, you're dealing with the fact that your own reaction doesn't make complete sense to you. This is the moment where frustration begins to build, because you can see both sides clearly. You can see why you should move forward, and at the same time you can feel why you're not. It's not a lack of desire, and it's not a lack of ability. It's a conflict between two internal signals that are moving in opposite directions. One says this is what you've been working toward, and the other says something about this is not safe. And the more this happens, the harder it becomes to ignore the central question, because it doesn't go away after one situation. It follows you into the next. If you want success, and you are capable of reaching it, then why does something in you keep stopping right before it becomes real? And why does that stopping feel almost automatic, like a response you didn't fully choose? Up to this point, everything can still be explained in terms of behavior, mindset, and experience, because it looks like hesitation, overthinking, or fear of change. But the pattern becomes harder to fully understand when the reaction feels stronger than the situation itself, and when it repeats even after you've learned from past experiences. This is where Edgar Cayce's perspective introduces a different way of looking at the same pattern, not as something that started in this life, but as something that may have been carried into it. In Cayce's readings, there is a recurring idea that the mind does not only respond to present conditions, it also carries impressions from past experiences that were strong enough to leave a mark. These impressions don't show up as clear memories. You don't remember specific events or detailed stories, but they can show up as emotional reactions that feel immediate and real, even when there is no obvious cause in your current situation. And in some cases, those reactions are connected to experiences where success itself was not safe. The idea here is simple, but it changes the way you look at the pattern. Because instead of assuming that success is always associated with reward, growth, and positive outcomes, you consider the possibility that at some point, success may have led to something difficult. It could have brought pressure that became overwhelming, or responsibility that carried consequences you were not prepared for, or visibility that exposed you to conflict, loss, or even harm. In that context, success was not just an achievement, it was also the beginning of something that came with a cost. If an experience like that was strong enough, it could leave an emotional imprint that stays active even when the original situation is no longer present. That means that in your current life, when you move towards success and reach the point where it becomes real, your mind is not only responding to what is happening now, it is also reacting to what success once meant at a deeper level. And that reaction doesn't need to be logical or clearly explained. It only needs to feel real enough to influence your behavior. This is why the hesitation often appears at the exact moment when success becomes immediate, because that is the point where the internal signal is triggered. It's not about the early stages where you are still building, learning, or preparing, because at that stage, success is still distant and doesn't activate the same response. But when the situation shifts from possibility to reality, from something you are working toward to something you are about to step into, the meaning of success changes, and with it, your internal reaction changes as well. From this perspective, the feeling of resistance is not random, and it is not a sign that you don't want success. It is a signal that success has been associated with risk at some level of your experience. That risk might not exist in your current situation, but the emotional response doesn't automatically adjust to that difference. It continues to respond as if the old pattern is still relevant. And because that response happens quickly and without clear explanation, it can feel like your reaction is coming from nowhere. This also explains why the pattern feels consistent across different areas of life, because the trigger is not tied to a specific job, relationship, or goal. It is tied to the meaning of success itself. As long as success carries that underlying association, the same response can appear in different forms, even when the situations are not directly connected. You can change the context, the people, and the goals, but if the internal meaning stays the same, the outcome tends to repeat. At the same time, this perspective does not remove responsibility or choice, because it does not say that the pattern is fixed or permanent. What it does is give you a different way to understand why the reaction feels so strong and so automatic, even when you consciously want something else. It shifts the question from "what is wrong with me" to "what might this reaction be connected to?" And that shift alone can change how you respond to the pattern. Instead of treating the hesitation as a flaw or a lack of discipline, you can start to see it as a protective response that may have made sense at some point, even if it no longer fits your current situation. And when you look at it that way, the goal is not to force yourself past it blindly, but to understand it clearly enough that it no longer controls your decisions without your awareness. Because if success once meant pressure, loss, or consequences that felt too heavy, then it makes sense that part of you would still treat it as something to approach carefully. But if your current situation is different, then the question is no longer whether success is dangerous. It's whether you are still responding to a version of it that no longer exists. Once you start looking at this pattern through that lens, it becomes easier to recognize it in people around you, because it doesn't always look dramatic or obvious. In many cases, these are people who are capable, consistent, and even respected in what they do. But there is a clear limit to how far they let things go. They build momentum, they create opportunities, and they position themselves well. But when things begin to shift into a higher level of visibility or responsibility, something in their behavior changes. You might see this in someone who does excellent work, but avoids roles that would place them in leadership, even when they are clearly qualified for it. They stay in positions where they have control and predictability, and when offered something bigger, they hesitate or decline in a way that seems reasonable on the surface. They might say they prefer stability, or that they don't want the extra pressure. And while that can be true, The pattern becomes clearer when this choice repeats across different opportunities over time. In another case, you might see it in someone who creates something valuable, whether it's a project, a business, or a body of work. And as it begins to gain attention, they start to slow down or pull back. Instead of expanding on that success, they reduce their output, delay decisions, or shift focus to something less exposed. From the outside, it can look like a change in priorities, but if you follow the timing closely, the shift often happens right when recognition starts to grow. This pattern can also appear in relationships, especially when things begin to move toward commitment or stability. Someone might be open, engaged, and present in the early stages, but as the relationship becomes more serious, their behavior changes. They become less certain, less available, or more distant, even if nothing negative has happened between them and the other person. And again, the explanation often sounds logical, but the timing reveals a deeper pattern. What connects all of these situations is not the specific context, but the point at which the change happens, because it always appears when something becomes real in a way that carries more weight. It's not about starting something new, it's about stepping into the consequences of that something becoming established, visible, or meaningful in a larger way. And for someone who carries an internal association between success and risk, that moment triggers a response that leads them to slow down or step back. The important part here is that this pattern is not rare, and it's not limited to one type of person or one kind of life path. It can show up in people who are highly driven, in people who are creative, and in people who are disciplined and focused. It doesn't depend on how capable someone is. It depends on how success is experienced internally, and whether that experience feels safe or not. And because the pattern is subtle, it often goes unnoticed for a long time, both by the person living it and by the people around them. It doesn't create obvious failure, and it doesn't remove progress completely. It simply creates a ceiling that is hard to see, but consistent in its effect. You move forward, you build something real, and then right at the point where it could expand into something larger, you stop just enough to keep it contained. When you start to recognize this across different people and situations, the pattern becomes harder to dismiss as coincidence, because the structure is too consistent. Different lives, different goals, different environments, but the same moment of hesitation appears at the same stage. And that repetition is what suggests that something deeper is shaping the outcome. Something that is not tied to the situation itself, but to how success is interpreted internally. At this point, it's important to separate this pattern from other ideas that sound similar on the surface, because if you mislabel it, you end up trying to solve the wrong problem. The most common comparison is fear of failure, because that is what people usually think of when they see hesitation or avoidance around progress. Fear of failure is about not wanting things to go wrong, not wanting to make mistakes, or not wanting to face negative outcomes. So the person holds back because they doubt their ability or expect something to break down. But what we're looking at here doesn't follow that structure, because the hesitation does not appear at the beginning or during the uncertain stages. It appears after progress has already been made and success is within reach. The person has already proven that they can do the work. They've already moved past the stage where failure is the main risk. And in many cases, they are closer to succeeding than failing. That means the fear is not centered on "what if I can't do this?" but something closer to "what happens if this actually works?" Another common comparison is imposter syndrome, where someone feels like they are not truly qualified for their position and fears being exposed as incapable. That can also create hesitation and self-doubt, especially when someone is stepping into a higher level of responsibility. But again, the structure is different, because imposter syndrome is tied to identity and perceived competence, while the pattern we're describing is tied to the outcome itself, not the person's ability to reach it. In this case, the person often knows they are capable, at least on a practical level, and they have evidence to support that. They have done the work, they have achieved results, and they have already moved through challenges that required skill and effort. The hesitation does not come from thinking, "I don't belong here." It comes from a deeper reaction that says something about being here may not be safe, even if that thought is not fully conscious or clearly defined. This is why the distinction matters, because if you treat this as fear of failure, you might try to build more confidence, take more risks, or push yourself harder to prove that you can succeed. If you treat it as imposter syndrome, you might focus on validating your competence or reminding yourself of your achievements. And while those approaches can be helpful in other situations, they don't fully address what is happening here, because the issue is not about getting to success. It's about what success represents once you arrive. From a psychological point of view, this pattern can be understood as an association between a specific outcome and a perceived cost, even if that cost is not immediately visible. The mind does not only evaluate whether something is possible, it also evaluates whether it is safe, and those two evaluations don't always lead to the same conclusion. You can believe that you are capable of achieving something and still feel that achieving it will create a situation you are not prepared to handle. That perceived cost can take different forms depending on the person and their experiences. It might be the expectation that comes with visibility, where success brings attention, judgment, or pressure that feels difficult to manage. It might be the responsibility that comes with a higher role, where success means carrying more weight, making more decisions, or being accountable in ways that feel heavy. Or it might be the change itself, where success alters your identity, your environment, or your relationships in ways that feel uncertain. When the mind links success to those kinds of outcomes, it starts to treat success not just as a reward, but as a potential source of stress or risk. And once that association is in place, the response becomes automatic, because the mind is designed to protect you from what it perceives as harmful, even if that perception is based on past experiences or assumptions that no longer apply. That means the hesitation you feel is not random. It is part of a system that is trying to keep you within a range that feels manageable and familiar. This is also why the reaction often feels out of proportion to the situation, because the mind is not only responding to what is happening now, it is responding to what it expects could happen next. The closer you get to success, the stronger that expectation becomes, and the more the protective response is activated. And if that response is not recognized for what it is, it can quietly guide your decisions in a way that keeps you just below the level where those perceived risks would become real. At the center of this pattern is a simple idea that is often overlooked, because most people are taught to see success as something purely positive, something that brings reward, progress, and recognition without much downside. But in reality, success is not neutral. It changes your position, it changes how others see you, and it changes what is expected from you. And because of that, success always carries some form of weight, even when it is something you truly want. That weight doesn't look the same for everyone, because it depends on how success interacts with your sense of control, your environment, and your past experiences. For some people, it shows up as increased responsibility, where success means making more decisions, handling more pressure, and being accountable in ways that feel constant. For others, it shows up as visibility, where success brings attention, judgment, and the feeling of being watched or evaluated more closely than before. There is also a more subtle form of weight that comes from change itself, because success often moves you out of a familiar position into something less predictable. It can shift your identity, your routines, and even your relationships, because the role you play in your own life starts to evolve. And even if that change is positive, it still requires adjustment. And that adjustment can feel uncomfortable if you are not prepared for it. When all of these factors are taken together, success becomes more than just an outcome. It becomes a transition point where your current way of operating is no longer enough. You are not just continuing what you were doing before. You are stepping into something that requires a different level of engagement, awareness, and responsibility. And if part of you associates that shift with difficulty or risk, then the idea of success starts to carry tension instead of clarity. This is where the core insight becomes clear. Because the hesitation you feel is not about whether success is good or bad in an absolute sense. It is about whether the version of success you are approaching feels manageable to you. If success is linked to outcomes that feel heavy, unpredictable, or difficult to control, then your mind will naturally treat it with caution, even if another part of you still wants it. And this explains why the pattern does not respond to simple motivation or encouragement. Because the issue is not a lack of desire. It is a mismatch between what you want and what you expect success will bring. You can tell yourself to push forward, to take the opportunity, or to stop overthinking. But if the underlying association remains the same, the hesitation will continue to appear at the same point. What changes the pattern is not forcing yourself past that hesitation, but understanding what success represents to you at a deeper level. When you can see clearly what kind of weight you are associating with success, whether it is pressure, visibility, responsibility, or change, you begin to separate the actual situation from the expectation you are projecting onto it. And that separation creates space for a different response, one that is based on what is real now, not what was experienced before or assumed to happen next. Because if success carries weight, then the goal is not to pretend that weight doesn't exist. It is to understand it well enough that it no longer controls your movement without your awareness. And when that happens, success stops being something you move toward and then away from, and becomes something you can approach with clarity about what it actually involves. At this point, the question is no longer theoretical, because the pattern we've been describing is not something distant. It's something you can look for directly in your own experience. You don't need to analyze your entire life. You only need to focus on specific moments where you were close to something that mattered, something that could have moved you forward in a real way. And instead of asking whether you failed or succeeded, the more useful question is what happened right before the outcome. Think about a time when you were close to a promotion, a project working out, or a situation where things were about to change in your favor, and pay attention to the moment just before that change became real. Did you move forward with clarity? Or did something shift inside you that made you slow down, hesitate, or step back without a clear reason? And if that shift happened, did it feel like a conscious decision? Or did it feel more like a reaction that appeared on its own? Now take that one moment and compare it to others, not in detail, but in structure. Because what matters is not the situation itself, but the point where your behavior changed. If you can see that the same kind of shift appears at the same stage, across different areas or different times, then you are not just looking at isolated decisions. You are looking at a pattern that has been shaping how far you let yourself go. And if that pattern is real, then the final question becomes simple but direct. If success once came with consequences, pressure, or something that felt difficult to carry, would you recognize it as an opportunity now? Or would part of you still respond as if it carries the same weight as before? If something in this video felt familiar, or made you look at your own decisions a little differently, Take a moment to stay with that. Because patterns like this don't usually become clear all at once. Sometimes it starts with just recognizing one moment where you stepped back and then slowly connecting it to others. If you found this helpful, you can like the video or subscribe to Edgar Cayce Narratives, because this channel is built around exploring patterns like this in a way that you can actually apply to your own life. And if there's a part of this that still feels unclear, or something you want me to go deeper into, leave it in the comments, because those questions often lead to the next video. And if you recognize this pattern in yourself, I'm also curious what that moment looks like for you. The point where things were about to move forward, and something inside you chose not to.